I couldn't believe, though, that I had worked there because I'd idolized Patsy Cline and Hank Williams for so long. I couldn't believe they'd worked the same place that I had, or that I was working the same place they were.
And now you've made, what, 4 records?
Yes.
3 by yourself and 1 with David Houston.
Mm-hmm.
They've all been hits. Apartment Number 9, Your Good Girl's Gonna Go Bad, Elusive Dreams, and this new one is gonna be probably the monster of them all.
Most of my ideas, though, that I have written about have come from real life experiences or something that I've gone through that I have really had to suffer through, and I feel like I can write it better because I've been there.
She was the woman who gave country music its most controversial anthem, the voice behind Stand By Your Man. But while the world saw a superstar wrapped in glamour and success, Tammy Wynette was living a life of chaos, pain, and secrets. Fans adored her honesty on stage, but behind closed doors, she battled illness, heartbreak, and a scandal so strange it still divides her family today. An alleged abduction that some claim never even happened. Was Tammy Wynette really the first lady of country, or the prisoner of a life she could never escape? Tammy Wynette's story didn't begin under the bright lights of Nashville. It began in a small Mississippi farmhouse, where survival, not superstardom, was the daily goal. Born Virginia Wynette Pugh in 1942, she lost her father to a brain tumor when she was just 8 months old. Her mother was forced to work in another town, so little Tammy was raised mostly by her grandparents, surrounded by cotton fields that demanded hard labor from sunrise to sunset. She grew up without luxury, often working alongside sharecroppers. By the time she was a teenager, she was already used to the responsibility most adults would shy away from. While other kids her age were dreaming about dances and dates, Tammy was dreaming of something bigger, an escape through music. She would belt out songs while picking cotton, using her voice not just for entertainment, but as a lifeline, a reminder that she was destined for more than the dirt roads of Mississippi. By 18, Tammy was married, and soon after, she became a mother. Her early years were a blur of babies, bills, and broken dreams. Before she ever set foot in a recording studio, she was already raising 3 daughters and holding down jobs that left her exhausted. She worked as a hairdresser, a waitress, and even trained as a beautician, all while secretly chasing her dream of becoming a singer. Music was not just a passion. It was her survival plan. She played small gigs, often singing with local bands, dragging her children along because she couldn't afford a babysitter. Every night, as she performed in smoky honky-tonks, she imagined her way out of poverty. Those bar rooms became her testing ground, a place where her raw emotions turned into something powerful enough to silence a rowdy crowd. But life had a way of testing her even harder. Her marriage crumbled, leaving her to care for her children alone. Divorce was taboo in the South during that time, and for a young woman with no money and no connections, the odds were stacked against her. Yet Tammy didn't back down. In 1966, with nothing but determination and her kids in tow, she packed up her car and drove to Nashville. It was not a glamorous arrival. She had little money, no home waiting for her, and barely knew anyone in the music business. What she did have was a voice so unique that it couldn't be ignored. A mix of vulnerability and strength that made every lyric feel like it came straight from her heart. At first, doors didn't open easily. She auditioned at labels, faced rejection after rejection, and worked in beauty shops just to scrape by. But her persistence finally paid off when she caught the attention of Epic Records. They signed her, and producer Billy Sherrill gave her a new stage name, Tammy Wynette, a name that would soon become iconic. Within just a few years, she transformed from a struggling single mother into one of the most talked about voices in country music. Her songs were not just hits, they were stories ripped from her own life. Listeners didn't just hear Tammy sing, they felt her pain, her resilience, and her longing. As her star began to rise, the world would soon discover that her voice was not the only thing that set her apart. Her music carried controversy, her personal life invited scandal, and her career was about to collide with fame in ways no one could have predicted. When Tammy Wynette finally broke through, she didn't just climb the charts, she exploded onto them. By the late 1960s, Nashville had never seen anything quite like her. With songs like Your Good Girl's Gonna Go Bad and Divorce, she proved she could take everyday struggles and transform them into anthems that millions connected with. Her voice carried a unique blend of vulnerability and power, the sound of a woman who had lived the lyrics she sang. That raw authenticity was her weapon. It made housewives, truck drivers, and heartbroken lovers feel as if Tammy was not just performing, she was telling their stories. But it was one song in 1968 that truly changed everything, both for her career and for her reputation. Stand By Your Man. On the surface, the song was simple, just a 2-minute ballad about devotion, loyalty, and forgiveness. Yet its message hit like a lightning bolt during a time when women across America were beginning to question those very values. The women's liberation movement was gaining momentum, and to many, Tammy's song sounded like a step backwards. Feminist leaders criticized it as a dangerous anthem that encouraged women to tolerate betrayal and mistreatment. Suddenly, Tammy was not just a singer. She was a target in a national debate about gender roles. Some radio stations refused to play the song, while others played it non-stop, sparking heated arguments between listeners. And while critics argued, the record-buying public made its choice. Stand By Your Man became one of the biggest hits in country music history, reaching #1 on the charts and crossing over to pop audiences worldwide. The controversy didn't sink Tammy, it made her unstoppable. The backlash, however, followed her everywhere. Interviewers grilled her on whether she really believed the lyrics, and women shouted at her outside venues, accusing her of betraying her own gender. Tammy often defended herself by saying the song was just that, a song. But deep down, the irony was not lost on her. Here she was, singing about loyalty and standing by a man, while her own marriages were filled with chaos, separation, and heartbreak. It became a defining contradiction in her career, the queen of heartbreak ballads, crowned for a song that critics said belonged to a different era. But Tammy never shied away from the storm. If anything, she seemed to thrive on it. Every controversy only fueled her fame. She wore her crown as the First Lady of country music proudly, even as whispers about her personal life grew louder. Fans saw a glamorous star on stage, dazzling in rhinestone gowns under the spotlight. But behind the curtain, her world was far from perfect. Fame had come at a cost, and the cracks in her private life were only beginning to show. Just as her career was peaking, Tammy would step into the most passionate and destructive relationship of her life. The kind of love story that would capture headlines, inspire duets that became classics, and nearly destroy them both in the process. If Tammy Wynette's career was defined by Stand By Your Man, then her personal life was defined by one man, George Jones. When they first met, George was already a country legend, known for his unmatched voice and equally notorious drinking. Tammy, meanwhile, was America's sweetheart, the First Lady of country music. On paper, they looked like a perfect match, but behind the glamour was a relationship built on passion, chaos, and heartbreak. Their romance began in scandal. George made his feelings clear long before Tammy had finalized her divorce from her second husband. In fact, one of their earliest encounters turned explosive. During a dinner, George allegedly flipped a table to make his interest known, leaving everyone stunned. Soon after, Tammy left her husband and ran straight into George's arms. To fans, it was a fairy tale, the two biggest voices in country music uniting in love. But to those who knew them, it was the beginning of a storm. Their marriage in 1969 was a headline event, celebrated as country music's royal wedding. Together, they recorded timeless duets like Golden Ring and We're Gonna Hold On, songs that painted the picture of everlasting love. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable. Audiences saw a husband and wife so in sync it felt like they were living the very ballads they sang. But offstage, the reality was much darker. George's alcoholism dominated their marriage. He would disappear for days, leaving Tammy to juggle her career, her children, and the burden of holding everything together. The press loved covering their fights, their separations, and their reconciliations, turning their private struggles into public spectacle. One infamous story became part of country music legend. George, in a drunken haze, once rode a lawnmower miles into town just to buy more alcohol after Tammy hid the car keys. For some fans, it was a funny anecdote. For Tammy, it was another reminder of the instability consuming their lives. She tried to stand by him, living out the words of her most famous song, but the reality was brutal. The constant cycle of drinking, fighting, and reconciling drained her. By 1975, the marriage collapsed in divorce. Still, the bond between them never fully died. Even after their split, Tammy and George reunited professionally, recording duets that became some of their most iconic work. It was as if they couldn't let go. Not musically, not emotionally. Their relationship was both a blessing and a curse. Together, they elevated country music to new heights, becoming its most famous couple. But it also left scars that Tammy carried for the rest of her life. Fans adored their duets, but few realized that every note was laced with the pain of what went on when the microphones were off. As much as Tammy wanted stability, her life seemed destined for turmoil. When the chapter with George closed, an even more complicated and dangerous one was waiting just around the corner. As Tammy Wynette's fame soared, her body began to betray her. Behind the sparkling gowns and powerhouse performances, she lived with pain so constant it shaped nearly every decision she made. It started with intestinal problems in the late 1960s, but what should have been routine medical care spiraled into decades of suffering. Over the course of her life, Tammy endured more than 30 major surgeries. Some doctors called her a medical mystery, while others quietly questioned whether every procedure was necessary. What no one doubted was the toll it took. She often performed while hooked up to IVs backstage, walking on stage with a smile while her body was racked with agony. To the public, she looked untouchable, but her closest friends knew that every show was a battle she forced herself to win. With surgeries came prescriptions, and with prescriptions came dependence. Painkillers became part of her daily routine, at first to manage her condition, but eventually as a crutch she couldn't function without. Reports from those around her describe cabinets filled with bottles, pills in her purse, and a reliance so strong that family members worried she was slipping into addiction. Tammy always insisted it was necessary, that without them she couldn't sing, couldn't tour, couldn't live. The country music industry demands resilience, and Tammy was determined never to show weakness. But the quiet reality was that she was caught in a cycle. The more she pushed herself to keep performing, the more her body broke down, and the deeper she fell into dependency. In October 1978, Tammy's life took a turn so bizarre that it sounded like something out of a movie. She told police she had been abducted at a Nashville shopping center, held at gunpoint by a masked man, and driven around for hours before being released on a desolate road. News of the ordeal spread like wildfire. Fans were horrified, the press descended, and Tammy's face was suddenly tied to a crime story that made national headlines. She appeared in public afterward with visible bruises and swelling, a haunting image that only fueled the drama. To her supporters, Tammy was a survivor who had stared down danger and lived to tell about it. But to others, something about the story never quite added up. From the beginning, there were inconsistencies. Tammy claimed her abductor never explained why she was taken, and that she was not robbed, which left investigators puzzled. The police could find no solid leads, no suspects, and no motive. As time went on, whispers began to circulate in Nashville. Was Tammy's story true, or was there more to it than she admitted? The speculation only grew louder years later when her daughter Jackie Daly publicly suggested that the kidnapping had been fabricated. According to Jackie, Tammy had been physically abused by her husband and manager George Ritchie, and the abduction tale was a cover to explain injuries he had caused. It was an explosive allegation that painted a much darker picture of Tammy's life behind closed doors. The truth, however, was never fully proven. Tammy stuck to her account of the kidnapping until her death, insisting she had been a victim of a violent crime. Law enforcement never reopened the case, and Ritchie himself denied any abuse. Whether the abduction happened as she claimed or was an elaborate cover-up, it showed how fragile her world had become. For all the glittering gowns, stage lights, and tabloid headlines, Tammy Wynette never fully left behind the simple world she came from. Beneath the image of the First Lady of country music was a woman who found comfort in things that had nothing to do with fame, most of all, cooking. While her career placed her in front of millions, her heart often longed for the quiet of her kitchen. Tammy was famous among friends and family for her Southern recipes, the kind of meals that reminded her of Mississippi fields and her grandmother's table. Fried chicken, cornbread, and homemade pies were not just food to her. They were pieces of home, proof that no matter how far she'd traveled, she never stopped being that little girl who once dreamed beyond the cotton fields. She even published a cookbook, Tammy Wynette's Southern Cookbook, which revealed not just her favorite dishes but also her personality. Its pages painted a portrait of a woman who was not afraid to be herself. Part superstar, part Southern homemaker. Cooking for Tammy was not just about feeding people. It was about holding on to family, creating warmth, and offering a piece of herself in a way that music could not. At her Nashville home, gatherings were a constant. Tammy was known for inviting friends and musicians over, often preparing meals herself. Despite her fragile health, she loved the act of playing hostess, making sure no one left hungry. These moments stood in sharp contrast to the chaos in her personal life. If her marriages and health struggles made her world unstable, the kitchen was her sanctuary, a place where she could control the outcome. When Tammy Wynette passed away in 1998, at just 55 years old, it felt like the end of an era in country music. The world mourned the loss of the woman who had given them Stand By Your Man, Divorce, and countless other ballads that spoke to heartbreak, resilience, and survival. But her death was not free of controversy. Officially, she died of a blood clot in her lungs. Yet years later, her daughters would question whether her reliance on prescription drugs and the control of her husband George Rishi had played a deeper role. Lawsuits were filed, questions were raised, and once again Tammy's name was surrounded by mystery. Even in death, the truth of her life was complicated. What was undeniable, however, was her impact. Tammy sold over 30 million records, won multiple Grammy Awards, and was posthumously inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1998. To fans, she will forever be the First Lady of Country Music, a title she carried with both pride and pain. Her voice became the soundtrack for women living through the struggles of marriage, divorce, and loneliness, and her songs continue to resonate because they were not just written, they were lived. Every lyric felt real because Tammy herself had endured the very trials she sang about. That authenticity gave her a timelessness few artists ever achieve. What makes Tammy Wynette unforgettable is the very thing that made her life so difficult: her vulnerability. She let the world see her cracks, and instead of hiding them, she turned them into art. Songs like Till I Can Make It on My Own still strike listeners because they echo the universal struggle of holding on when everything feels like it's slipping away. That is Tammy's greatest legacy. Not perfection, not glamour, but honesty. She didn't just sing country music, she embodied it in all its heartbreak and resilience. Even now, decades after her passing, debates continue about her marriages, her health, and the mysterious abduction that some still question. But maybe that's fitting. Tammy Wynette was never simple, never one-dimensional. She was messy, complicated, brilliant, and broken. And that's why the world can't stop talking about her. She was, and always will be, the voice of heartbreak, an artist who turned her pain into something unforgettable.